a lot of people have described this election as uh, exceptional and historic. And what I wanted to do is give a little bit of historical analysis because basically we've been here before, folks. In fact, there have been four previous federal general elections in this country in which the major perceived issue in the campaign was the Canada-US relationship. So this isn't new. Um, I would say, though, I think it was more profound in this election than even any of the others. Uh, but nonetheless, they were significant as well. And basically, there were four of those. And the first one, I don't have a lot of time. I can't give you a lot of history. First one was actually in 1891, which was the last election of the founder of our country, John A. Macdonald. And the Conservative Party was in a lot of trouble. There was a new Liberal leader by the name of Wilfrid Laurier. It looked very much like the Liberals were going to win that election in 1891. However, as Macdonald said, Laurier gave him a gift, or as he said, a lifeline. Laurier decided to emphasize the traditional federal Liberal position about free trade with the United States. It was then called reciprocity, and it was called unrestricted reciprocity. And so the Liberal leader decided to run on that issue. It gave Macdonald his opening. And Macdonald spent the next month of the campaign going up and down, particularly English Canada, describing the Liberal leader as disloyal to the Crown, to the Empire, and as pro-American. In fact, at one point, the slogan of his campaign was, a British subject I was born, a British subject I will die. And the implication was that Laurier and the Liberals were unpatriotic. That unpatriotic card worked. Macdonald's government was in a lot of trouble, but he was able to get his last majority, and he very much won it on that issue. That was 1891. The next time was at the other end of Laurier's of his career. In 1911, he was the prime minister. He had 4 successful terms, and the Liberal Party was in a lot of difficulty. But the Conservative Party under Mr. Borden also was having its difficulties, particularly in Quebec. And it looked like they were going to call an election. Looks like Laurier was going to win that election because he's very popular. However, in January 1911, the Ottawa bureaucrats working with Washington entered into a draft free trade agreement with the United States. And Laurier decided to run on that as the issue in the campaign. The Conservatives were floundering, they didn't know issue, and suddenly Borden decided, and he got up in the House of Commons, and he just off the top, and we've heard this before, said this is unpatriotic, this is a sellout, we are selling ourselves and our Canadian soul to the Americans. And the slogan for the Conservative Party in that election, which became the winning slogan, is no truck or trade with the Yankees. That was the actual campaign slogan for the Conservatives. And the great Sir Wilfrid Laurier, and he was great, was defeated. And he was primarily defeated on that issue. In fact, nothing's changed. The Speaker of the US House of Representatives, a fellow named Champ Clark, when they were debating the free trade agreement, I'm going to quote now, he said, "I am for it because I hope to see the day when the American flag will fly over every square foot of the British North America possessions clear to the Arctic Circle." So we've been there before. But Borden actually was able to win it. In fact, Rudyard Kipling, the great icon of his age, I'm quoting him, he said, "Canada, it is her soul that Canada risks today in this election if she signs the free trade agreement." And I'm just simply to emphasize, because sometimes on these issues, you get excessive rhetoric, don't you? Well, it's got to be a classic of that. That was 1911. The next one was in 1963. We're moving ahead here. Not as significant, but that was the election in which Mr. Diefenbaker's government was in a lot of difficulty. And the main issue of that campaign was that Canada had entered into an agreement with the Americans under the NORAD agreement to not only house Bomarc missiles in Canada, but eventually to have them tipped with nuclear weapons. The Bomarcs were delivered, but Mr. Diefenbaker started hesitating on the issue of whether he would actually have them nuclear tipped. Mr. Pearson, the leader of the Liberals, who looked like they were going to win the election because the Diefenbaker government was in a lot of trouble, initially agreed with Mr. Diefenbaker, but he switched. The Liberal Party switched, and Mr. Pearson said, "No, I think we should honor our NORAD commitments." And so the whole election, much of that campaign was over that issue. Mr. Diefenbaker was successful in the sense that he probably kept the Liberals to a minority. It looked like they were going to get a majority. They didn't get a minority on that issue. In other words, he was digging that vine of anti-Americanism. That's a strain in Canadian political culture. and Mr. Diefenbaker played on that, but not successfully in the end. And then the last one, and the one we're probably most familiar with, was in 1988, the so-called free trade election, where the Conservatives went to the electorate on the free trade agreement that had been negotiated with the United States. And actually, a lot of people don't remember that election. When that election was called, Mr. Mulroney and the Conservatives were only using free trade as one of the issues. In fact, that campaign started off very much on all sorts of other issues. And interestingly, some reflections of what we went through, when that campaign began, the Conservatives were 20 points ahead in the polls under the Liberals under Mr. Turner. Mr. Turner decided to grab the issue, and he described the free trade agreement, which, by the way, we've all lived under in this country, for 30 years. He said, if this is adopted, it will be the disintegration of Canada. And what is at stake is our salvation, and it is the Sale of Canada Act. That's what Mr. Turner said, and he ran the whole campaign on that, but it partly worked. The polls started to shift. And in fact, in about 10 days, the Liberals and Conservatives were tied. The Liberals had moved that 20-point, sounds familiar, doesn't it? And then there were a couple of polls, Angus Reid had the Liberals ahead, heading for a possible Liberal majority government. The Conservatives were able to turn the tide, attacking Mr. Turner personally. And in the end, Mr. Mulroney was able to get a majority on that issue. But it was interesting, there was a famous debate between them. And in that debate, leaders' debate, critical couple of minutes, Mr. Turner really put Mr. Mulroney on the defensive. And he said things like, a whole history of our country going back to Macdonald. It was interesting, a Liberal citing a Conservative prime minister is, to resist continentalism, to resist the Americans. Mr. Mulroney tried to defend it and say it's just a commercial trade agreement. It could be canceled on notice. That was the issue of the campaign. So Mr. Turner very much ran very similar on what I'd call a Captain Canada campaign. And it almost worked. But in the end, public opinion slightly slipped, and the Conservatives in the end up having a majority. And actually, I think the reason they got a majority is Quebec. The Conservatives lost in every single province, but in Quebec, they gained seats. So Quebec was very much in favor of the free trade agreement. The point I'm simply making is that we've been there before. We've now experienced another election where the US-Canada relationship, well, I think was absolutely central. Somebody asked me the other day, oversimplistically, my explanation for the election. If I had only one word or one name, it would be Donald J. Trump.